About 6 months ago, I began the process of designing the garden that you now see behind me. At the time, I knew that I wanted two apparently conflicting things from my garden. I wanted it to be a wildlife haven, and I wanted it to be a functional and beautiful place to relax. The trouble was, when you looked into researching what that might look like, I only found examples at the extremes. Either a completely wild meadow or a perfectly manicured, weed-free, heavily maintained garden. I didn't find very much material that would help me achieve both these things. It seemed to be a case of either or. So today I want to show you some ways that you can make your garden environmentally friendly without compromising the aesthetic qualities of your back garden and making the most of your limited space. I hope these tips on how to be more wildlife and generally environmentally friendly are useful and applicable for your garden. Let's get into it. The initial purpose of my design for this garden was to make it environmentally and wildlife friendly without compromising the aesthetic appeal of it as a relaxing garden space. I don't have enough room to dedicate it all to wildlife, and yet I want to do what I can with my small patch of land to best benefit the environment. So what could I do? The first thing that comes up when you start researching how to make your garden more environmentally or wildlife friendly is how bad lawns are for the environment. Now, most of the statistics that I could find on this refer to the USA, but even then, they're still largely applicable to us here in the UK. For example, did you know that in America there are 63,000 square miles of lawn? That's roughly the size of Florida. And 30% of America's drinking water goes on to irrigating those lawns. Now you might be thinking, well, here in the UK that isn't as much of a problem because there is rain and that obviously does help somewhat. But in spite of that, the CO2 emissions related to lawn care are staggering. In the US, Americans use 70 million pounds of pesticides to keep the lawn fertilised and weed-free each year, and this runs off into the groundwater. In fact, the CO2 emitted maintaining a lawn is 4 times the CO2 captured by the lawn itself. And then you need to add on the costs of mowing. 1 hour of cutting a lawn with an average petrol mower is the equivalent of driving for 200 miles. So what can we do about that? Well, firstly, I want to tackle the monoculture nature of lawns. That is, one plant covering vast amounts of land, reducing habitat for native wildlife. But how can I do that without compromising the aesthetics? I don't want to have a great big meadow in my back garden. I don't have the space for a small wildflower patch. So what can I do instead? Thankfully, I found the answer, and it's these. These are a collection of wildflower lawn plugs that you can plant directly into your grass. And the best thing is, they will tolerate being mown with a lawnmower up to 5 centimeters in length. So you can still have your lush green lawn and make it wildlife friendly. There are 15 different varieties here, and they are all UK native plants that have been disappearing as we've been getting rid of our meadows and replacing them. To plant your wildflower plugs, first make sure that your plugs have been well and truly watered and that the compost is wet to touch at the bottom of your tray. Next, take a knife and cut out a small circle of turf where you intend to plant your plug. Next, loosen the soil beneath the turf so that you've got enough loose earth to be able to push your plug into. Here, I'm going to plant a ragged robin. Push the plant from your tray using either a tool or your finger. Sink the plug deep into the hole and push the earth tightly in around it. Once you've added some wildflower plugs to your lawn, here are a couple of other things you can do to make your lawn more environmentally friendly. One, if you're going to buy a mower, try and buy one that is electric based rather than petrol based, or a push mower that is only powered by your force as you push it through the ground. Try and mow slightly less frequently. Be okay with your lawn being slightly longer. Not only is this good for the planet in terms of CO2 emissions, but it's also good for wildlife as it gives them a chance to establish some habitat in the grass. And 3, be okay with brown patches. Grass is super resilient and it will recover from drought. But if you must water, then try to use rainwater where you can. Installing a rain barrel is a really good way to help you meet your gardening needs without using precious drinking water and other resources that have had to be chemically treated. Step 2, grow your own and ditch the pesticides. You don't have to have a lot of space and you don't have to grow all of the fruits and veg that you might eat in a year, but even growing just a small amount of food yourself drastically reduces the need for plastic packaging, travel miles as food is flown or driven around the world, and it's also a really rewarding experience. My vegetable patch here is just under 5 meters long and less than a meter wide, but even a smaller piece of land than that would do. If you want to ditch the pesticides, how might you go about doing it? Well, firstly, grow more seeds than you're eventually going to need. For example, here are my Brussels sprout seedlings. There are 7 plants here, but I don't need 7 fully finished vegetable plants for the harvest. That means that if some get attacked by birds or aphids or they get frostbitten and die back, it doesn't matter, and I won't be fertilizing them or using pesticides in order to keep them fresh and healthy, because I've basically calculated some percentage of loss into the seeds that I grow. The other thing you can do is use natural biological pesticides, not in the form of chemicals, but in the form of companion planting. These are some French marigolds that I've grown, and French marigolds are a great crop to grow near your vegetable patch because they attract aphids, and that will mean that the aphids would rather feast on these than on your veggies. Similarly, look into companion planting some of your vegetables. What can you plant near each other that is going to help reduce pests? These are all good tips, and they'll mean that you don't have to resort to pesticides whilst you're growing your own food. Step 3, encourage the birds. No wildlife-friendly garden is complete without irregular bird visitors. This is a standard bird feeder filled with different sorts of bird food, and it means that we've got a large range of birds visiting us in the garden. Installing bird boxes in your garden is another brilliant way to encourage the birds to come and make their home. I have got 2 different sorts of bird box in my garden, an open-fronted one like this, which is best for blackbirds and robins, and a smaller box with a hole in the front, which is good for tit species. Over time, I'm going to let the ivy on this fence grow back around that box to provide additional shelter, and this box is already occupied. Step 4, protect from predators. Once you've done all of this work to encourage wildlife into your garden, it's really important to provide as much protection from pests, particularly cats, as you can. As you can see, these holes show that we have got some field mice living in our flower bed. Now, I'm delighted about that, but when my security camera showed that the local cats were coming and sitting here waiting for them to pop out and eat their breakfast, I knew I had to do something. So I've installed this motion censored cat deterrent, which lets out a high frequency noise, which is just enough to put the cats off sitting and waiting here for their breakfast. It may not deter them completely, but even a small amount of improvement is going to benefit the wildlife in your garden. Bee friendly. And by that, I mean you need to be able to feed the bees all through spring and summer. So for example, in this flower bed, I've got a specific range of flowers that will all bloom at different times. as well as this cherry tree behind me, so that as soon as the bees emerge in the spring, they've immediately got a food source, and it will last for them all through the summer months as each of these different plants brings up shoots, flowers, and then dies back. Some bee hotel designs can be really unsightly. They can take up a lot of space, and they aren't necessarily something that you would want to see in your garden. However, having some sort of hibernating and sheltering space for insects is really going to improve the wildlife friendliness of your garden. This bug hotel was designed so that it looked like a window next to our shed. Adding a bee waterer like this one to your garden is another great way to encourage insects and to help them thrive in your environment. This is just a simple dish filled with glass stones in my case, although pebbles or gravel would work just as well. And you just fill it with enough water that means that bees, butterflies and other insects will be able to get a drink without risking drowning. Step 6. Plant a tree. And don't expect to get any fruit from it. This is a crabapple tree, and although it doesn't look much at the moment, it's a brilliant tree to put in a small garden. There are tons of varieties and they don't necessarily have to grow very big. It's going to be an amazing resource for wildlife. That's because crabapples hold their fruit well into the autumn, and sometimes, depending on the variety, deep into winter as well, without ever dropping it on the ground. That's great for you because it means there's no unsightly mush on your floor come autumn, but it's great for the birds because it will continue to provide food for them deep into the winter. The other brilliant thing is, when fully grown, the blossoms are abundant and smell amazing. Step 7. Just add water. Access to water is key for any garden that's designed to attract wildlife. In this pond, we've already seen birds bathing, as well as several native insects. You can make your pond more wildlife friendly by adding a few key features. Although we inherited this pond when we moved into the house, we have changed it to make it considerably more wildlife friendly. We added this shelf by balancing an old paving slab on some terracotta pots, and we also have added a second shelf filled with water plants at this end. These logs, submerged in the water, are perfect habitat for insects like dragonflies and also for any toads, frogs or other amphibians. However, the overall aesthetic of the pond is still very much a water feature as opposed to a traditional wildlife pond, and therefore it doesn't detract from the aesthetic nature of the garden itself. Step 8. Hedgehogs Welcome. One of the leading causes of decline of Eurasian hedgehogs is the fact that we are so used to Fort Knoxing our gardens now that they do not have the ability to roam freely across multiple lawns, gardens and neighbourhoods hunting each evening. Adding a simple hedgehog door to your gate is a brilliant way to help them. Now, we own pet rabbits, so we've had to make ours closable. But a simple hole, 5 inches by 5 inches or 13 centimetres by 13 centimetres, is a great help. And what do hedgehogs eat? Slugs and snails. So really, it's a win all round. You can also put food out for hedgehogs, but please never put milk and bread, as this can do them serious injury. If you're lucky enough to end up with hedgehogs regularly visiting your garden, you can encourage them to stay by building them a hedgehog house. This is a simple structure and it needn't take up lots of space in your garden, but you can make it even more appealing to hedgehogs by building a log pile on top of it. Not only will that help them keep it nice and warm, but it will also give plenty of places for their favourite foods to hide. Another creature that is really beneficial for gardeners, since they eat slugs and snails, are frogs and toads. You can encourage them to stay in your garden by providing them a toad abode. These are just some simple upturned flower pots, and I've also added some bark and old pieces of moss to help create a nice cosy environment for them to shelter from the sun during the day and also potentially hibernate over winter. Since my pond is raised, I've also added a ramp so that they can easily access water. But if you don't have water in your garden already, simply bury a small shallow dish so that they can keep their skins moist during the day. And finally, step 10, wild where you can. You may not want to dedicate a huge section of your lawn over to a wildflower meadow, or you may not have the space. But even planting wildflower seeds in a simple tub like this can go a great way to making sure that our native animals and insects, which have evolved to feed on and rely upon our native wildflowers, can really still thrive and benefit in our gardens. I hope you found these 10 tips helpful. By gardening in this hybrid manner, we can still help wildlife in our own backyards without compromising the functional and aesthetic qualities that we all strive for in our gardens. Let me know in the comments if you've got any tips that I've missed, and I wish you all the very best with turning your own back garden into a wildlife haven.